Welcome to So-and-So, brought to you by BERNINA, made to create. I'm Meg, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the quilting community. A casual conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Our guest today is Amanda Murphy, a very well-known quilt and fabric designer. Amanda is a national teacher, has an independent pattern line, designs fabric and embroidery collections, and is a spokesperson for BERNINA Quilting and Longarm. She's the author of several quilting-related books and answers questions about quilting every day in her Facebook group, Quilting with Amanda Murphy. Amanda, welcome to So-and-So.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm sure many of our listeners already know you, but this is going to be a great opportunity to get to know you better. I just want to jump right in. You've successfully built a career around something you absolutely love doing. What were your early influencers and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, as with a lot of people, my parents definitely were early, I guess, influencers, and neither one was into the arts, although my mom did a lot of handwork, but they definitely instilled in me the belief that I could do it. And I'm so grateful for that. You know, sometimes it just, your parents give you what you need to go forward in whatever direction you're going to go. And I definitely think um, my tendency to dive right into things comes from both of them, good and bad, because it's always good to dive right into things. But also, I always think that I can do a million things at once. And,
Oh, I do understand that.
I'm not always great on this is a realistic amount to do. Sometimes I bite off more than I can chew, but I always think that I'm going to be able to do it in a certain amount of time, always.
Sure.
And that definitely comes from my parents.
Yeah, you spin a lot of plates. You know, in our introduction, we talked about the books you've written and keeping up with your Facebook group and everything. So, needless to say, you almost have to have that mindset to be able to do all the things that you do every day.
Well, I like that aspect of the job. I like working on different things. Sometimes you're writing patterns, and sometimes you're sewing, and sometimes you're drawing fabric. I like going in and out. It keeps it interesting. But yeah, I definitely bite off more than I can chew sometimes. But it usually works out in the end.
It does. Now you mentioned drawing the fabric and the designs. Your background is in industrial and graphic design. Tell us how this has played into your quilt and fabric design and what serves as your inspiration when you're doing these designs.
Well, I'll say a few things. First of all, my first job out of college, and this is going to date me, um, was in a graphic design firm where we did annual reports, et cetera. And I was hired to do websites. And at that time, like, websites were in their infancy. You really had to learn how to do things online. But in that job, which I worked for a man named Zane Carter. He was like a Renaissance man. We did a little bit of everything. So I went to press checks. I did videos with him. I did a little bit of everything, and I didn't realize how influential that was until years later. Because now, you know, with the way the software works, we can do a lot of that from our houses. But I didn't realize at the time I was getting those different skills, how they were going to influence me. On the industrial design side, I went to school for industrial design and then really didn't do anything with industrial design. I was more on the graphic side. But when you look at my rulers, my quilting templates, I definitely drew on those skills years later. So sometimes you're learning a skill and you think it's not going to apply to anything, even mundane things like I mentioned, I did websites early on when websites couldn't do a lot. And I was that arm of a graphic design firm. And I also worked at a multimedia firm. Those skills, even the ones I didn't like, the very basic coding, and I do say very basic, they come into play, just running your own business. Just being able to do your own website and doing the download code files, and I do have help from my son sometimes on that, on setting up things, but those skills come back into it at unexpected times, if that makes sense.
It does. Now, I have a question. So you went to school for industrial design, and you really went into a pretty traditional job from there. How did you begin quilting? How did that start?
Okay, so I always loved fabric. Like when my mom went back to work, I think I was in fifth or sixth grade, and I couldn't drive yet. And I had her sewing machine, right? And I would just make things. I mean, they were atrocious. I made her once this pink lace dress. Oh, it was
Atrocious.
terrible. And, she acted so pleased. I thought she loved it. And then years later, I said, that pink dress? I said, you wore it. I said, it must have been horrible. And she said to me, I only wore it once. But she faked it. She seemed pleased with it at the time.
But she did wear it. That's the good thing. She did.
Well, at least she wore it as she left the house, so I felt good about it. That's what I'm saying about your parents being influential. I also made like a tree skirt with angels, and I painted the angels' faces with makeup. That was like, I'd make all sorts of things. So I always had that interest of making things with my hands, and I always was very interested in fabric. But after I had kids, I had taken off a few years after I had kids, and I just sent in um, a book of designs to a fabric company that I had just made on a whim. And that's how I got into this industry, which is unusual. Now I feel like a lot of people don't enter through fabric, they enter through teaching or they enter through patterns or something like that. But at the time, that's how I did it. But I always had that interest. I'd stitched like 16th century band samplers on linen just because I love it so much. Um, so I always had that interest. I always kind of wanted to be in that area. It's just life didn't take me to it till a little later.
You made a comment that I think is important for people who are new to quilting or sewing or anything else. That the first dress that you made, it was a humble beginning for somebody who is so accomplished, and for people to just keep at it and keep trying and hang in there. If you don't like what you made, make something else. That there's a beginning for everybody.
You know what? It's totally about the experience. It's not about the end product. I hate to say that, but it's true. It's about the experience of making and creating and the joy of making and creating. And that's where I said my parents were so influential. They were always appreciative, and I'm pretty sure at times there was nothing to be appreciative of, but they were always appreciative. So which I think is really important when you're teaching also. Um, Particularly, I mean, I'd say children, but you know, if moms or grandmas or grandpas or dads are teaching their kids to sew, it's important, even though we all have those fears, not to impart that to someone who's learning. If I have a situation in a class where I have a more advanced person doing free motion next to a beginning person, and the more advanced person is like, this isn't good, that's going to rub off on the beginning person. So what I try to do is get that more advanced person to be kind of a mentor to the beginning person. And if you can spot that in a classroom, I was teaching one time and this woman walked in. She was like, I hate free motion quilting. If she's listening, she probably knows who she is. She's like, I hate it. And I thought, oh dear, like, what am I going to do in this class? She was the best person I've ever had in a class because she was amazed by everyone's work. Like, she just went around the
Huh.
room like a cheerleader, and that can really change the tenor of a class. So I think it's very important not to tell yourself you can't do it, but also not to impart worries to people who are learning, because you have to get them to try and to jump out of their comfort zone.
Hmm.
And that's very important.
This podcast is about the community, and I think these are good words for people already established or new to it. It's bring each other along is what I'm hearing you saying. Now you're talking about teaching. How does your teaching inform your design, and how does your design inform your teaching?
Well, I'd say that I get a lot of my ideas from teaching. That's what I missed during this pandemic because I'm not teaching in person. And a lot of the questions that arise give me new product ideas. Um, or a lot of the problems that people have, I'll see that duplicated over different classes. So you get to the point you can almost anticipate the questions that are going to happen, which is very useful during Facebook Lives, etc. But it's very inspirational to teach. I do miss that in-person thing, so I'll be glad when we're all vaccinated. But, you get, for instance, some of my products that are heavily influenced by teaching are definitely rulers and ruler panels
Mm-hmm.
because they're developed to almost be a class within itself, or my whole cloth quilt patterns. All of that is from teaching experiences. It just makes you think in a different way.
Sure. Now you mentioned the pandemic and all that's going on, and it's a fact that many people have come to sewing and quilting because of this. Really, the numbers have grown. I'd like to talk about things that you love to do, which are free motion and ruler work quilting. For those who are new to quilting, would you explain what these are and how they differ? And most importantly, why are they your favorite?
Okay, so as far as quilting goes, if we think back historically, people who were hand quilting, a lot of times they'd stamp the designs on the fabric and then they follow it, with a line of stitching in and out, and they get this texture to their quilt. And as machines have progressed, we've started to do that on machines. So if you haven't quilted before, basically what you're doing, you're taking your feed dogs, the things that move the fabric on the machine, you're putting them down, and basically you're moving the fabric under the needle and creating designs that way, right? So that's what free motion is, and it tends to be very freewheeling. It does take practice to get the feeling because it's almost like when you learned cursive, you didn't do it in one day. You had to take practice a little every day.
A week or so, right?
Right. Yeah, it just takes a week. To get to the point, if you practice a little bit, like 4 times a week, like 15 minutes a day, over the course of a few months, you'll get to the point where you have a lot more coordination and, you don't have to, it sounds funny, but you don't have to think as much about all the different things you're doing. But you're moving it under the needle. So it tends to be very freewheeling. It would be hard to free motion a perfect circle, just like it would be hard to draw a perfect circle, right? Because, or a straight line, that would be harder than a curvy line. So it's really good for organic shapes like leaves, etc. Ruler work kind of fills the void, and ruler work was actually developed for frames for quilts that were done with a long arm machine on a frame. And when you're doing it on a frame, you don't have any feed dogs anyway, so you need a way to do a straight line. So people came up with using plastic templates that are thick, and you drag the foot along the plastic template. And once those started appearing in shows and just being more widespread, everyone, even people on domestic machines, wanted to do that. So that's what happened. The machine manufacturers developed ways to do that on domestic machines. So with a ruler, you're essentially doing the same thing on a sit-down machine. You're moving the fabric and creating the stitches that way, but you have a foot that has a really thick depth, and so it can ride along a plastic template,
Hmm.
right? And so you can create those geometric shapes that are very hard to free motion. So they're like two hard sides of a coin.
Sure.
And a lot of times people feel more comfortable with ruler work first just because they can follow along the edge of the ruler. They don't have to think about, where I'm going next quite as much. A lot of piecers actually start with ruler work and then kind of move backwards. One day they look at these geometric shapes and they think, oh, I'd really like some texture within this intersection. I'm just going to do some stippling or some swirls or like just some loops, right? And all of a sudden they start to free motion, but it comes out of simple patterns where they're just trying to add texture.
That makes sense. And why do you like both? They're so different, but you've said that you really enjoy doing these. What fulfillment do you get from each one of these?
I like the contrast of both together.
Aha.
So they're like the yin and the yang. If you have a straight line next to a curve, or like circles next to more organic swirls, you're going to get more contrast in your quilt top overall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're just different to do. Sometimes you're in the mood to do one, and sometimes you're in the mood to do another. And you hope you're not on a deadline where you have to do the other on on a time when you just don't feel like it. But they really work in tandem with each other. As I said, if you have plain ruler work, but you put in just a little bit of free motion, it's going to give it life. And the other thing I would say is when you add the free motion in, it looks more organic and it looks more like it has a hand to it.
Mm-hmm.
Our computerized quilting systems can do amazing things, but there's still something about the hand in the fabric that just, it's like this human touch. Everything is a little bit different. And I actually love that look. A lot of times I will do computerized things when I don't have time, but I also love the look, the imperfections that come with it. And there's some things that people are better at than computers, like filling weird spaces.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to spend a lot more time setting that up on a computer. So it just, I like both. I don't know. I love these machines. So, I guess that's the industrial design side coming out again.
I think so. Now, you've said this is a great time to be a quilter. Why is that? And talk to us about how technology and art are influencing each other in the quilting world.
I do say that a lot. This is like a golden age, I think. This is just amazing. Okay, so first of all, I know this broadcast is sponsored by Bernina, but like Bernina aside, even if Bernina was not sponsoring this, I am obsessed with Bernina machines. Anyone who's watched you, like my Facebook lives, like I love them. I love them. I love them. I love them. I just can't, like, everything about them. And so, what I'd say is what's fascinating to me about these machines in general that's coming out, and about the work that's being done in the quilting community, is how they're influencing each other. So, for an example, I said we all wanted, a lot of people who saw long arm work done with templates wanted to be able to do that on domestic machines. So Bernina comes out with a special foot that enables you to do that on your quilting machine. Then they come out with the Q series that enables you to do ruler work with stitch regulation, which is a special thing. So they are constantly watching what people are doing and coming out with new features. On the flip side, if you looked at feather motifs on quilts 50 years ago, they were all hand stamped and hand quilted. And so what you'd see is these very precise designs, because if you have a hand needle, it's easy to be precise, right? It might take forever, but it's easy to be precise. Well, now when we think of feathers, we think of these very freewheeling things with leaves, and they're not symmetrical. They're very wavy. And that is because of the way we make them with our machines. It is actually, unless you're using an embroidery machine or a computerized machine, it's hard to follow a line that's stamped exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's way easier to let your plumes be crazy, right? And so our feathers have evolved. If you see a feather that's asymmetrical up a quilt, you're not going to think anything of it anymore. You're going to say, oh, what a beautiful feather. And that's because we've changed how we make them with this technology.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's constantly playing off each other. I can't wait whenever I go to Bernina University, et cetera, which is the dealer's show. I can't wait to see what they've come out with, because what I want to see is what I can make with it. And so they're constantly playing off each other. And that's why I think it's a particularly exciting time to be in this industry.
I think you're giving our listeners a new and more expanded way to look at quilts, to see things they might not have seen before. And you talked about putting life into the quilt, to really looking at the heartbeat of that quilt, and see things they've never seen before.
Right. You see so much of the maker and the making process in the quilt itself.
You do, and so it's that unique touch of the person who made the quilt that people can start to really see and experience and enjoy. Now, we're talking about people in the quilting community, and you've been a part of this for a while, and it's certainly given you the opportunity to know quilters worldwide. I've had the joy in preparing for this podcast and to hear wonderful stories of friendship and fellowship and support that transcend. It's part of the experience you talked about before. Are there one or two stories that you've heard that come to mind?
Well, I will say, first of all, from just traveling, I've traveled a lot of places. Um, I do have, first of all, on the business side, I have a few dealers who I've become very close to over the years who I can constantly bounce ideas off of, and they can get, and they have been real mentors for me within this industry, and they know who they are. They understand the business side of it and the art side of it, right? And they are in contact with the customers all the time. So if I have questions, I can connect with them, etc. And then, over the years, I've also developed relationships just that I really trust with people in the industry. And sometimes, I'll give you two examples. Um, People can see things in you that you can't see yourself. So, one of the things over this pandemic that has absolutely shocked me is I'm doing these Thankful Thursdays um, on Facebook, and it's in my Facebook group, Quilting with Amanda Murphy. And on the first and third Thursdays of the month, I get on, and it's basically a stream of consciousness. I sew on camera, I
Right,
show things on camera. So it's like a mini class, but not really a full class, right?
right.
I am amazed people watch. Other than my mother, who I knew would watch anything I did. She doesn't quilt, but she watches every week. Other than my mom, people watch. That shocks me. But I wouldn't have gone down that route if I was by myself. But Jeannie Delpit, who's with a manager of national events with BERNINA, one day said to me, I think if you got on camera, people would really watch. You should consider that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have thought that. So I tried it, right? And sometimes people push you out of your comfort zone, and it's a good thing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was like, gee, I can't believe it. People watched. It was crazy. Um, the other thing is I have people on the artistic side that I really value. I have art director at Benertex. Her name is Jessica. She is like an extent. Now I draw all my fabric myself, but she is like an extension of my arm. So I like if I wasn't available and something needed to be decided, I would absolutely trust her unequivocally. And I know because I was in the graphic design industry how rare it is to have a really, really good art director who can inhabit your head.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and so relationships like that over the years, when you get those, you really value them because that's what's going. It's so important to have a good editor and to listen to that editor.
Mm-hmm.
It's because when you're doing fabric, you're kind of in a hole working on fabric for 3 or 4 weeks, right? And I don't do anything else during that time period. And at the end of those 3 or 4 weeks, when I'm done drawing, sometimes you're so close to it, you can't tell. I always draw extra things that I'm not going to use. You can't tell what to pull. And to have someone who can tell you the honest truth and can be like, I like this, this is working with, that is so invaluable to have an editor like that. And I haven't always had that. So I really value that. So, on the artistic side, there's some things. And then there's just the students that a lot of them who have taken classes with me are also in my Facebook group, etc. And that's really nice during this time too. And then there's new ones who maybe I'll meet in the future when we're all traveling again. And I look forward to that because it's so exciting when someone comes up and is like, I thought I could do this because I saw you do it on Facebook and they just tried something. That is really exciting and really gratifying. Just as a person, that's really gratifying.
Absolutely. Now, I want to focus in a little bit more on something you said about being pushed out of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
Do you have an example?
Oh gosh, the Facebook Lives. I was like,
Just in itself,
well,
right?
first of all, when you guys see me on videos with Bernina, um, uh, usually if it's an edited video, they're doing my makeup. They're I like flew in for it. I have real clothes on. Not that I obviously have clothes on now, but it's like here on the Facebook Lives, I'm in my workout clothes. I decided when I did it, I was like, gosh, if I'm going to do this, I'm not like doing getting dressed up each week. I'm just going to quilt like I really quilt. Right. So I have my
Sure.
ponytail. I have like, talk about out of your comfort zone, and when I film these things, I always say, like, if you're watching it as a recording, because they do stay up for a few weeks, don't ask questions there. Go into my group to ask questions, because I'm never going to watch these again once I film them. Because if I watch them, I'd lose my guts to film them. Like, there's no way I'm going to watch these things.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
because people ask in the live stream, but then sometimes people don't realize it's recorded, and I don't want to miss their question. That is out of my comfort zone. Other things that are out of my comfort zone, though, just in terms of artistically, I did Bernina's 125th anniversary quilt, and they wanted it to be all gold. Like everything was gold and white.
And there is a picture of that online on your website. It's beautiful.
Thank you. But I wouldn't have thought to do an all gold collection. That wouldn't have been on my top 20 list of things to do. But I really love how it turned out. And then I added in the blacks too for more drama, just to make the quilts look different. Um, that is something I would not have not done on my own. And that's one of the things I love working with Bernina is they'll ask me, could you do, this with this theme? Well, I wouldn't have done that, but it's good to be pushed artistically out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I love that collection for the 100 Jubilee was the name of it. And I love the collection. We later did it in like a gray and a plum color too. I would have never drawn it unless I had been pushed to draw it. It's a little more traditional than I usually draw. But I love that type of challenge. And that definitely comes from graphic design days where I really do consider myself more of a commercial artist, in that I like that challenge of having like a client give you, you know, an idea and you figure out how to execute it. And that's what Bernina lets me do a lot. So I love that.
The Facebook thing in itself, I'm sure, has been a challenge, but obviously connected you with more people than you had before because of the ability to reach anywhere.
Right.
In your words, Amanda, you are the voice of inspiration for both new and experienced quilters. So, what's the most important thing you want them to know about this craft?
I think as far on the quilting side, as opposed to the piecing side, a lot of piecers come to it and they think they're trained, not to clip off corners, or they're thinking about quilting in terms of line. And when you're quilting, it's more about texture. That's number one. So it's very important to me that the quilt hangs square from far away. It is not important to me those little mistakes I make, because you'll never see them when the quilt is done, because you're creating a texture. It's not about line anymore when it comes to quilting. So that's one. And then I think one of the things that makes a good artist just in general, and this isn't just for quilting, is the ability to kind of change gears quickly when a mistake happens. So, and because mistakes are usually the things, like I'll put a background that I didn't anticipate behind something else I drew, and it'll take me off in another direction for a collection. And you have to be willing to do that. And I think really good artists can look at their mistakes, reassess, and go another direction, because they're not really their mistakes. The mistakes are kind of where the magic happens. And where in a quilt, if you have a design wall and you put up an unanticipated color and it does something and it draws your eye in a certain way, being able to take that and go with that instead of being too wed to what you thought it was going to be in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
can make it more interesting. And the same thing in quilting, adding in a motif that you didn't think about and then expanding upon that as you gain new skill sets is really important, not being too wedded to one thing. Your quilt can be different. It can express you.
So it's a piece of who you are. It's unique, and the little imperfections make it special.
Right. Don't spend time ripping. There's too much to quilt.
I like that. I like that. Amanda, I'm I'm finished with the questions I've asked you, but what I always end up asking our guests at the end of so-and-so is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Gosh, I can't think of anything. I think we covered lots of things today.
We
I
did.
can't
We
think of
did.
anything. No, I think just go out there and gain a new skill set, right?
Absolutely. Just try it is what I'm hearing you say. Just get going and try it. And there's after this conversation, I'm sure that there are some of our listeners or many of our listeners that might want to reach out to you. What's the best way for them to do so?
You can reach me. My website is blog.amandamurphydesign.com. And if you have a specific question, you can use the contact form on that. That's where my shop is too. But if you have questions that other people might benefit from, I would recommend joining my Facebook group, which is Quilting with Amanda Murphy. There are questions when you join. You don't have to give me your email, but please answer the 2 questions, because that's how I tell you're not a robot. So believe it or not, now we have to be careful of those things. So it says, like, what's your favorite quilting technique? Don't answer yes, because you might be a robot, right?
All of them.
It's not a test. It's just that's how I tell that people aren't robots now, because you get a lot of those little bots. And I have a YouTube channel, things like that, but all of that can be accessed through my website, blog.amandamurphydesign.com.
Perfect. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it. Another story about someone just like you. Someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life, a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to megoodman@theflintrock.com and put "You should hear their story" in the subject line. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank BERNINA for making this program possible. I'm Meg, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.